Either I cut your hair, or you don't fly today. That sentence wasn't whispered. It was spoken out loud, in front of a gate full of passengers at LAX, by a flight attendant holding a pair of scissors. And the person she said it to? An 18-year-old black teenager named Cameron Lee, standing tall in his suit and tie, carrying a first-class ticket and the weight of generations on his shoulders. Cameron wasn't just any young man. He was valedictorian of his class, a national scholar, and the only student invited to speak at the Youth Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. His dreadlocks weren't just hair. They were 5 years of patience, tradition, and pride. Each lock told a story, taught by his Haitian grandmother, encouraged by his father, and worn like a crown. But on that morning, just minutes before takeoff, a woman with a uniform and unchecked authority decided that Cameron's hair made him unfit for business class. She claimed it violated grooming standards. She lied. She threatened. And when Cameron tried to explain, tried to hold onto his dignity, she reached for the scissors anyway. What she didn't know was who she had just targeted. Because Cameron's father, Marshall Lee, is one of the most powerful black CEOs in America. A man with ties to Wall Street, Capitol Hill, and every major airline boardroom. And the moment he picked up the phone and heard his son crying, everything changed. This isn't just a viral headline. This is a black story that shook an entire industry. It triggered lawsuits, sparked federal action, and led to the biggest policy overhaul in aviation history. So if you're here for justice, for truth, and for the kind of power that rises when community says, enough, you're in the right place. Tap that subscribe button and stay locked in. Because what happened next at Gate 27A didn't just make news. It made history. Cameron Lee was the kind of young man you don't forget. At 18, he stood 6'2" with calm confidence, a lean frame from years of varsity basketball, and a face that could light up a room, or silence one when needed. His eyes held the kind of wisdom that made adults pause. Not because he tried to impress them, but because he didn't have to. There was something in the way Cameron carried himself. Every movement was intentional, every word measured. And when he smiled, it wasn't just polite, it was earned. Born and raised in Palo Alto, California, Cameron grew up in a world of tech giants and billion-dollar ideas. But his world was different. His father, Marshall Lee, was a tech mogul, sure. But he raised Cameron with values that stretched beyond IPOs and innovation. Respect. Community. Legacy. Cameron was never told to act like he belonged. He was raised to know that he already did. He was the top student at Trident Academy, a private school known for sending kids to the Ivy League. Straight A's. National debate champion. Robotics team lead. Cameron wasn't just smart, he was sharp. But his brilliance was wrapped in humility. He tutored struggling classmates after school, volunteered every weekend at a local shelter, mentored freshmen who didn't have anyone else. And then there were the dreadlocks. 5 years of growth. 5 years of ritual. Cameron's locks weren't just a style, they were a statement. A journey. Every morning, he spent 30 minutes moisturizing, parting, and twisting. Not because someone told him to, but because he honored what they represented. His grandmother, his dad's mother, taught him about their family's Haitian roots, the warriors who wore their hair as crowns, the freedom fighters who resisted colonization not just with weapons, but with identity. Your crown reflects your story, she'd tell him, running her hands gently over his hair. Never let anyone cut your story short. Cameron lived by that. He was heading to Washington, D.C., that day not as a tourist, not just for a scholarship reception, but as a keynote speaker. Chosen to represent the next generation of black leadership. Chosen to speak on equality, resilience, and what it meant to carry history forward. He wasn't arrogant. He wasn't loud. But he was undeniable. And for one flight attendant, that was enough to become a threat. Linda Brooks had the kind of smile that made people think she was nice. Not kind. Just polite. The corporate kind of friendly, where your tone stays smooth even when your eyes say something else. And for 15 years, that smile had gotten her exactly what she wanted: respect, seniority, and just enough praise to stay off anyone's radar. She wasn't the worst flight attendant on the roster. She followed protocol, showed up on time, and rarely raised her voice. But there was something underneath all of that polish, something darker, something she had learned how to hide behind policies and phrases like professional standards and passenger comfort. Linda had a type. Not the type of passenger she liked, but the ones she didn't. Young, black, confident, hair worn in natural styles, braids, afros, dreadlocks, anything that reminded her of the changing world she didn't understand and didn't want to see. Linda grew up in suburban Missouri, in a household where you didn't talk about race unless you were blaming it. Her father worked in law enforcement. Her mother taught 3rd grade. They never said the word hate, but they didn't need to. The message was clear: some people just didn't belong. She brought that mindset with her into the skies. Over the years, Linda developed what she called her professional radar. She claimed it helped her spot passengers who might cause issues. In truth, it was a filter for her biases. If you were white, well-dressed, and quiet, you were a model traveler. If you were black, confident, and comfortable in your skin, you were a red flag. She learned to mask it well. She never used slurs, never raised her voice. But her version of racism wasn't loud. It was quiet, strategic, the kind that hides behind vague language and weaponizes rules no one ever reads. Hair, for example. She believed dreadlocks were dirty, unkempt. She never said it out loud, but it was there in every side eye, every question disguised as concern. Do you need help freshening up? Are you sure you're in the right line? And when someone like Cameron Lee walked into her boarding area, young, black, first class and proud, her radar went off like an alarm. Linda didn't care about Cameron's achievements. She saw the dreadlocks and made a decision. Today, she wasn't going to smile. She was going to enforce. And no one, especially not a kid with hair like his, was going to challenge her version of order. The boarding area at Gate 27A was calm, at least on the surface. Passengers gathered near the first-class lane, scanning their phones, sipping coffee, adjusting briefcases and baby carriers. Flight 117 to Washington, D.C. was boarding soon, and everything was right on schedule. Until Cameron Lee stepped forward. His stride was smooth, his eyes focused. He had checked in early, passed security without a hitch, and now held a first-class boarding pass with his name printed in bold. Cameron wasn't just excited, he was proud. This trip represented years of effort. Years of pushing through noise, statistics, expectations, and doubt. And he had earned every bit of this flight. Then, it happened. "Excuse me, sir," said a voice. Thin, cold, too sharp for customer service. Linda Brooks had stepped into his path, blocking the lane like a final boss in a video game. Her posture was rigid, her tone rehearsed. "Before you board, I need to speak with you privately." Cameron blinked, confused. He looked at the gate agent, who had already scanned his pass and waved him through. But Linda was wearing the same uniform, holding a clipboard, and asserting herself like she outranked everyone. "Is something wrong with my ticket?" Cameron asked. Linda glanced at his hair, then back at him. "It's about your appearance," she said. "Your hairstyle does not meet our grooming standards for first class." That word, grooming, hit him like a punch. Cameron's chest tightened. He looked around. People were watching now. Phones were slowly rising, eyes narrowing, and yet, no one stepped in. "My hair," he repeated, trying to keep his voice calm. "This is how I wear it. It's clean. It's professional." Linda pulled out a laminated sheet. Not an official policy document, but it looked like one. It had small print, vague phrases, and no specific mention of hairstyles. But she pointed to a line that read, "All passengers in premium cabins must maintain an appearance consistent with our professional standards." Her voice grew louder. Your hairstyle is not consistent with that. And just like that, Cameron Lee, valedictorian, scholar, keynote speaker, was reduced to a spectacle. Not because of his actions, but because of his hair. As the silence grew heavier, Linda reached into her service bag and pulled out scissors. The tension in the air cracked. "Either I cut your hair, or you don't fly today," she said. That was the moment the entire gate went still. And Cameron's humiliation began. The moment Linda lifted the scissors, everything changed. For a few seconds, the terminal fell into a kind of stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. It was the kind of silence that screams louder than words, the sound of collective disbelief, of shared discomfort, of people trying to decide whether they were really seeing what they thought they were seeing. Then, someone hit record. A young woman near the back of the line, holding a tablet and pushing a stroller, raised her phone and started live streaming. Another passenger quietly tilted his phone to capture the confrontation. Within seconds, footage of Cameron Lee's humiliation was being shared, first among bystanders, then across the internet. And that's when the atmosphere shifted. "What the hell is this?" a voice called out from the crowd. A man in his 50s, wearing a business suit and a Harvard law pin on his lapel, stepped forward. "You're cutting his hair? Are you serious?" That's a child. He didn't know Cameron, but he saw himself in him, decades younger, holding dreams and dreadlocks, facing the same kind of silent cruelty. Another voice joined in, this time from a mother standing with her teenage son. "Leave that boy alone," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "His hair is not your business." Passengers began murmuring, loudly now. Some gasped. Others whispered in disbelief. A few stepped back, uneasy, not sure how to react. But many stepped forward, building a wall of presence around Cameron, not yet protection, but resistance. Linda tried to hold her ground. "I'm enforcing grooming standards," she insisted, eyes scanning the crowd, tone brittle with defensiveness. "Standards based on what?" Someone shot back. "Your bias." "He's dressed better than anyone here," said another. Cameron stood frozen, heart pounding, his hands clenched at his sides. The shame, the confusion, the helplessness, it all felt like too much. But through the rising noise, he heard someone behind him say the words he needed most. "Your hair is beautiful." It came from a young black girl, maybe 10 years old, holding her mother's hand, looking up at Cameron like he was a king. And that was the moment the crowd truly turned. This wasn't just about policy anymore. This was about dignity, about history. And the entire gate, strangers just moments before, now stood united in one voice. This is not okay. This ends here. Marshall Lee was sitting in a private meeting room on the 47th floor of a downtown San Francisco high-rise. Around him were senators, tech executives, and education leaders, discussing policy, innovation, and the future of artificial intelligence. But all of that vanished when his phone vibrated twice, then again, and he saw his mother's name on the screen. He stepped out of the meeting without a word. He never ignored her calls. Ezra. Especially not when his son was traveling alone. As soon as he answered, he heard it, the panic in her voice. "Marshall," she said, breathless. "It's Cameron. Something's happened at the airport. Some woman, a flight attendant, she's cutting his hair. Right there at the gate. In front of everyone." Time slowed. "What do you mean she's cutting his hair?" he asked, his voice low but dangerous. "She said his dreadlocks didn't fit the airline's grooming policy. She blocked him from boarding. She's humiliating him. He tried calling you, but you didn't pick up. So he called me." Marshall didn't respond right away. He didn't scream. He didn't panic. He switched. In an instant, the calm, charismatic CEO of EtherCore, the man who spoke at global summits and moved billions in market value with a single statement, became something else. He became a father. A father with power. "Text me everything you know," he said. "Names. Flight number. Airline. Any video. Send it now." He ended the call, opened his contacts, and scrolled to a section of his phone few people even knew existed. Numbers that didn't need introductions. People who didn't wait on emails. He made the first call. Rebecca Sloan, CEO of Atlantic Fly. A woman he'd sat next to at donor dinners. A woman whose company depended on his investment firm's $700 million in preferred equity. She answered in 2 rings. "Marshall," she said, cheerful. "I was just..." "Rebecca," he interrupted. "Your employee just assaulted my son at LAX. Cut his hair at the gate. I have video. You have 10 minutes to fire her and issue a public apology, or I dismantle your entire airline." Her silence said everything. This was no longer about customer service. This was war. And Marshall Lee had just declared it. Marshall Lee didn't waste time. The moment he hung up with Rebecca Sloan, his phone was already dialing the second number. He wasn't calling assistants. No press teams. No legal buffers. These were direct lines, reserved for crisis only. Call 1. Prestige CEO, Rebecca Sloan. She was still processing his threat when Marshall added one more detail. "You've got 6 minutes left," he said coldly. "You'll find the video trending under #HandsOffMyCrown. Cameras were rolling from 5 angles. Your gate agent didn't stop it. Your employee committed assault. In public. On a black teenager." "Marshall," she started, voice suddenly tight. "Don't marshal me," he cut in. "I helped get you into that seat. I can help pull you out of it." Then he hung up. Call 2. Shareholder Alliance. Michael Drake, managing partner at Fortress Capital. Drake controlled over $3.5 billion in aerospace holdings, including a 12% stake in Prestige Airways. He and Marshall had co-invested in tech aviation deals for over a decade. When he answered, Marshall skipped the small talk. "Sell every share of Prestige. Today. All of it." "Marshall, what's going on?" "Civil rights disaster," Marshall said. "Their staff humiliated my son, cut his dreadlocks in public. On video. It's about to go viral. You need to dump the stock before it tanks. And if you want to stay in business with me, short it." There was no hesitation. Done. Marshall didn't even say thank you. Call 3. U.S. Department of Transportation. Deputy Secretary Angela Ruiz. Angela was a straight shooter. They had clashed before on funding timelines but had built a respect based on mutual influence. She answered, breathless. "Marshall, I'm in between meetings." "Angela. Hate crime on federal property. I need the DOT to open a formal investigation into Prestige Airways. Their staff assaulted my son at LAX. Racially motivated. Video confirmed. I'll send it directly." Angela exhaled hard. "Do you want this escalated?" "Immediately. I'm requesting federal charges, assault, discrimination, and civil rights violation. The airline's culture enabled this. If you stall, I go public. Send the files. I'll alert our legal team now." 3 calls. 9 minutes. The engine had started. And Marshall Lee wasn't just pushing buttons, he was building a machine of accountability. By the end of the hour, stock prices would fall. And by the end of the day, the entire industry would feel it. By the time Marshall finished his 3rd call, the fire was lit. But he wasn't done pouring gasoline. Call 4. National Media. Olivia Chen, senior producer at Global News Tonight. Olivia wasn't just any contact. Marshall had handed her 3 exclusive scoops in the past 2 years, each one earning her network top ratings. She knew the difference between a story and a movement. "Olivia," Marshall said, voice razor sharp. "I have something. It's going to make national headlines in 30 minutes. Whether it's with your network or another one is up to you." "You've got my attention," she replied. "Black teenager. First-class ticket. Dreadlocks cut by flight attendant at the gate. Unprovoked. Racially targeted. Entire thing caught on video. 5 different angles. Crowd reaction. Real-time footage. Hashtag already trending. He sent her the clips mid-call. Olivia clicked, and within seconds, she was silent. "Marshall," she finally said. This is historic." "No," he said. "This is America. Now tell your legal team to prep fast. Because once this runs, the airline's going to spin hard. I want the truth out before the PR machines start lying. You'll have national coverage by 6 p.m. tonight's top story." He hung up without a word. Call 5. Social media mobilization. Darius Cole, CEO of VoxPulse. Darius ran one of the largest influencer networks in the country, controlling a reach of over 200 million impressions per day. He was also black, a former classmate of Marshall's, and had once said, "If you ever need the streets louder than the suits, call me." Marshall did just that. Darius. Viral time. "I saw it already," Darius said. "It's hitting my radar now. Say the word. Hashtag is hashtag hands off my crown. I want it on every platform. TikTok, IG, Threads, X. Make it impossible to scroll without seeing it." "Consider it done," Darius said. "We'll launch a community challenge. Get celebs to repost stories from others. Turn it into a movement. Give it 90 minutes. You've got 30. And just like that, the internet began to flood. Call 6. Black Education Alliance. President Renee Langston. Renee had mentored thousands of black youth across the country and led policy campaigns in over 20 states. She and Marshall were both warriors for visibility and equity. "Renee, I need a press conference by tomorrow morning. Cameron's story needs to be more than a headline. It needs to become a cause." "I'm on it," she said. "Where?" "Howard University." "Say less. We'll call it what it is, an attack on excellence." By the time the sun set, a father's rage had become a national roar. And no one in the airline industry could pretend they didn't hear it. By the end of the business day, Atlantic Fly was no longer just an airline. It was a headline, a hashtag, and a cautionary tale unraveling in real time. The first sign of trouble hit Wall Street at 3:12 p.m. Eastern Time. Prestige Equities, one of the largest institutional holders of Atlantic Fly stock, began a sudden sell-off. Within 6 minutes, 2 more major funds followed. The price per share dropped by 9% in under 15 minutes. But that was only the beginning. As the video of Cameron Lee's humiliation spread across every platform, TikTok, X, Instagram, YouTube, the public response exploded. Influencers with tens of millions of followers reposted the footage. Celebrities spoke out. Activists mobilized. And ordinary citizens flooded the airline's accounts with questions no one could answer. What policy allows a child's hair to be cut without consent? Why did no employee stop it? And how often has this happened before? By 4:45 p.m., the Atlantic Fly website crashed under the weight of comments, complaints, and refund requests. Customer service lines rang out with endless hold times. Screenshots of canned, tone-deaf responses from the airline's chatbot were shared thousands of times. One reply in particular went viral. "We apologize for any inconvenience caused." That line alone cost the company $28 million in dropped sponsorships within an hour. Luxury brands, those proud to be associated with Atlantic Fly's first-class experience, began pulling partnerships. A 5-year global deal with a top hotel chain was terminated. A major credit card company suspended their co-branded loyalty program. Travel blogs labeled Atlantic Fly the face of corporate racism. By market close, the airline's valuation had dropped by 31%. That's nearly $2.4 billion in shareholder value, gone. Emergency board meetings were called. Senior executives scrambled. PR firms were on standby. But there was no controlling the narrative anymore. Because this wasn't just a brand crisis. This was cultural. This was about respect. About dignity. About a system that allowed discrimination to hide behind policy until it was dragged into the light. The final blow came from the inside. A whistleblower email, leaked to national media, revealed that Linda Brooks had 3 prior complaints filed against her, each involving black passengers, each quietly dismissed. Now, nothing could be dismissed. The Atlantic fly was falling fast, and Marshall Lee had only just begun. Linda Brooks didn't think she'd be arrested. Not really. She thought, at worst, she might be suspended. Maybe reassigned. After all, she'd seen it before. Situations swept under the rug, reports rewritten, complaints that vanished into HR black holes. She was confident the company would protect her. It always had. But this time was different. The moment she clocked out at LAX, she noticed something strange. 2 plainclothes officers were waiting by her car. No flashing lights. No yelling. Just quiet authority and matching badges. Linda Brooks. One asked. She hesitated. Yes. You're under arrest for assault on a minor, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and racial discrimination on federal transportation property. Her breath caught. Assault? On federal property. They read her rights. Calm. Clear. As if they had rehearsed this 100 times before. Linda protested, of course. I was enforcing policy, she insisted. I was doing my job. He looked unkempt. He didn't belong in first class. But the officers didn't flinch. That's for a judge to decide, one of them said. They placed her in handcuffs. She didn't resist, but her pride shattered on impact. Cameras flashed from nearby terminals. Someone recorded her being escorted away. By the time she reached the holding center, her face was already circulating across the country. She was trending now too. Not for loyalty. Not for performance. But as the face of systemic abuse. The Crown Slayer, one caption read, posted alongside a split image of Cameron's before and after. Inside the station, Linda sat alone in a holding cell. Her phone buzzed for hours. Lawyers, friends, a few co-workers who wanted nothing to do with her anymore. But the loudest message came from the public. You don't get to violate someone's identity and walk away unscathed anymore. The district attorney moved quickly. With mounting pressure and clear video evidence, formal charges were filed within 24 hours. Federal hate crime statutes were considered. Civil rights groups rallied outside the courthouse. Protesters held signs reading, "Protect our crown," and "Accountability takes flight." Linda was denied immediate bail. The judge called her a threat to public trust and cited her past misconduct, which had resurfaced in internal reports no longer buried. For the first time in her career, Linda Brooks was powerless. And for the first time in this story, justice had a name, a charge, and a face behind bars. Cameron Lee didn't disappear after the incident. He didn't retreat from the public eye, didn't hide behind legal teams, didn't let his father fight every battle for him. Instead, Cameron did something few expected from someone just 18 years old. He stood up. 2 weeks after the story broke, Cameron walked onto a stage in Washington, D.C., not as a victim, but as a speaker. The Youth Leadership Summit had extended a special invitation, turning his scholarship reception into a national address. The auditorium was packed. Reporters lined the walls. And when he stepped to the podium, wearing a simple gray suit and his remaining dreadlocks tied back with care, the room went silent. "My name is Cameron Lee," he began, his voice steady. "And I'm not here today to talk about trauma. I'm here to talk about transformation." He told the crowd what happened, briefly, clearly. No dramatics, just facts. The humiliation, the scissors, the silence. But then, he shifted. "I could have let that moment define me," he said. "I could have let shame bury my voice. But instead, I'm choosing to build something from it." That something became the Crown Rise Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to protecting the rights and dignity of Black youth in schools, travel, and workplaces. Its first mission: provide legal aid and mental health resources to children who had faced discrimination based on their appearance. Donations flooded in within 24 hours. Over $1 million by the end of the week. Cameron also began working with national organizations to push forward legislative changes, partnering with educators, lawmakers, and cultural leaders. His goal wasn't just to be heard. It was to change the system that allowed someone like Linda Brooks to operate unchecked for years. But perhaps most powerful of all was Cameron's presence. He became a symbol of resilience, not just for Black youth, but for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. His interviews weren't angry, they were reflective. He didn't shout, he educated. He carried himself not as a martyr, but as a mirror, showing the world both its cruelty and its capacity to evolve. As for his hair, he began growing it back the very next day. Because his crown wasn't just cut, it was reforged. Stronger, louder, and now, unstoppable. What started as a personal tragedy quickly became a national awakening. Across the country, something shifted. Parents began having new conversations with their children, not just about safety, but about identity. Teachers revised dress code policies. Barbers and stylists posted signs that read, "Your crown is safe here." And thousands of Black youth began walking a little taller, knowing the world was watching, and finally listening. But change didn't stop at awareness. Fueled by public outrage and Cameron Lee's steady advocacy, lawmakers moved fast. What once took years of lobbying now took weeks. With bipartisan support and pressure from civil rights groups, the Crown Protection Act, creating a respectful and open world for natural hair, was introduced on the federal floor. It wasn't just symbolic. The bill outlined specific legal protections for individuals wearing natural hairstyles, including dreadlocks, braids, afros, twists, and other expressions tied to culture or religion. It made it illegal for any business, school, or federal agency to discriminate based on hair texture or style. It classified forced grooming or appearance-altering policies as civil rights violations. And it empowered victims with tools to take immediate legal action. But more than the legal language, the message was clear. America could no longer hide behind vague words like professionalism, when what it really meant was conform to whiteness. Cameron was present on the day the law passed. He stood beside members of Congress, educators, civil rights attorneys, and young students from around the country. His father, Marshall, stood a few feet behind him, pride written all over his face. When the president signed the bill into law, Cameron was handed the pen. "This law," he said during the press conference, "isn't just about hair. It's about dignity. About not having to trade your identity for acceptance. About finally saying, we belong, without compromise." The Crown Protection Act passed with overwhelming support. States began adopting it at their own level. Airlines, hotels, universities, and corporations rushed to update their grooming policies to align with the new federal standard. Training programs on cultural sensitivity were no longer optional, they were mandatory. For the first time in decades, a piece of legislation had been born not out of strategy, but out of outrage. Out of one teenager's pain, a national promise was made. And this time, the country intended to keep it. Every story like this leaves behind a lesson. And sometimes, that lesson isn't wrapped in policy or applause, it's rooted in something deeper. What happened to Cameron Lee was more than a violation of his rights. It was a public attempt to erase identity, to send a message that excellence still had a dress code. But what the world saw instead was how dignity, when defended boldly, can become contagious. Cameron taught us something. He taught us that silence is not safety. That when we see someone being humiliated, our response matters, whether it's a quiet nod of support or a loud voice of protest. He reminded us that power is not just about titles or money. Real power is the ability to use your voice, your truth, and your pain to protect others. And Marshall Lee reminded us that being a parent isn't just about showing up when things are good. It's about showing up when your child is bleeding, in spirit or in body, and standing in the gap with everything you've got. But this story doesn't belong to just one family. This is a Black story. But it's also a human story. A story about what happens when people stop turning away. When policies get rewritten. When communities say, never again, and mean it. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt like you had to shrink to fit in, remember, your crown was never the problem. The world just needed to learn how to honor it. And if you've ever seen something wrong and stayed quiet, ask yourself, what will you do differently next time? Because real change isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's one decision. One person who refuses to look away. One crown defended. If this story moved you, drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe no one should ever be forced to choose between their identity and their seat at the table, hit that subscribe button. Because we're not done telling the truth. We're just getting started.